Navy patrol planes. Routine patrol. Only behind every cloud may be an enemy. Midway Island. Not much land, right enough. But it's our outpost. Your front yard. These are the natives of Midway. Tojo has sworn to liberate them. The birds seem nervous. There's something in the air. Something behind that sunset. Excitement this morning. The Dawn Patrol has sighted an enemy fleet. During the night, flying fortresses had landed at Midway.
An historic council of war is held.
That fellow's walk looks familiar. My neighbor's boy used to amble along just like that. Say, is that one of them flying fortresses?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Why, that's young Will Kinney. He's from my hometown, Springfield, Ohio. He's not going to fly that great big bomber.
Yes, ma'am, that's his job. He's a skipper.
Will's dad is an engineer. 38 years on the old Ironton Railroad. And his mother, huh? Well, she's just like the rest of us mothers in Springfield or any other American town. And his sister, Patricia, well, she's about as pretty as they come.
I'll say so.
Well, Junior Kinney. Good luck. God bless you, son.
Suddenly, from behind the clouds, the Japs attack.
this really happened.
Meantime, our warships stalked the Jap fleet. Suddenly, the trap is sprung. Navy planes roared from the decks of our carriers. Army bombers, Marines, thundered destruction over a 300-mile battle area. Forces were hit and hit and hit again.
Men and women of America, here come your neighbor's sons, home from the day's work. You want to meet them. There's Jimmy Thatch, 7 meatballs on his plane.
How many more today, Skipper?
Back at Midway, Tojo swore he'd liberate the natives.
They seem just as free as they ever were.
Battle of Midway is over. Our front yard is safe. But a big job is still to be done. Day after day, our patrol planes search for survivors. Every tiny coral reef, every distant mile of sea. Search for men who fought to the last round of ammunition and flew to the last drop of gas and then crashed into the sea. 8 days, 9 days, 10 days without food or water.
His first cigarette.
Boy, that first drag sure tastes good.
"11 days. Well done, Massey Hughes. Logan Ramsey. Frank Fessler.
That's 13 for Frank.
Boys to the hospital. Please do, quickly. Get them to clean cots and cool sheets. Get them doctors and medicine, the nurses' soft hands. Get them to the hospital. Hurry, please.
There was a hospital. Clean, orderly, 100 beds. And on its roof, the Red Cross plainly marked. The symbol of mercy the enemy was bound to respect.
The next morning, divine services were held beside a bomb crater that had once been a chapel. At eventide, we buried our heroic dead, the last salute from their comrades and their officers.
Captain Simard of the Navy. Colonel Shannon.
Major Roosevelt.
With This is a battlefront. A battlefront like no other in the long history of mankind's wars. This is an air front. The working day begins, as it will end, with the ground crews, as much a part of the fortress as her wings. If you're a mechanic, you've got your own bomber. You get attached to it. But you know when your ship goes out on a mission, you may never see it again. So you do your work as well as it can be done, perfectly. Because you wouldn't want anything to go wrong that would be your fault. Today, the bombs will be taken from these bomb dumps somewhere in England and delivered to specific points in Wilhelmshaven, Germany. To deliver them is the job of the 8th Bomber Command, just a hauling job, yet one of the most difficult and complicated of military operations. General-purpose demolition bombs. Impact velocity as high as 750 miles an hour. Pierce 5 inches of armor plate. Destroy a factory. Briefing at 0800. Pilots, bombardiers, and navigators take their places. The group commander, Colonel Stanley Ray, steps up to the target map, and for the first time you learn where you're going. Sometimes your face turns white when you find out. Sometimes the feeling you won't come back tightens your insides. Not so long ago, you were sitting like this in a college or high school classroom, not listening too hard, perhaps even a little sleepy. But you listen here. And as you listen, you don't have time to think of yourself. Fear fades. You concentrate on the mission. Type of formation, assembly point, 0 hour, route to target, weather, enemy fighter, enemy flak, route back home. If forced down in enemy territory, destroy equipment. If taken prisoner, give no information. Name, rank, and serial number. That's all. These are the passengers with one-way tickets. And this is the crew of the Memphis Belle, 324th Squadron, 91st Heavy Bombardment Group. Just one plane and one crew in one squadron, in one group, of one wing, of one Air Force, out of 15 United States Army Air Forces. Well, fellas, we've never had an easy ride over there yet. And today won't be any different. No escort except unfriendly. So keep your eyes peeled. Don't get excited and yell when you're talking on the intercom. Save your ammunition and make your shots count. And let me know what goes on back there, Quinlan. Yes, sir. Stay on the ball, gang, and she'll bring us back like she's always done. Okay? Let's go. They have completed 24 missions in this, the toughest theater of air war, the big league of sky fighting. Their experience is priceless. And so, if the Memphis Belle comes back this afternoon, they will be sent to bring the vital lessons they have learned to thousands of air crew men in training at home. Home is America. This is a battlefront, like no other in this or any war. No monster armies, no booming cannon. Only the roaring engine sound of the bombers pounding through the quiet English countryside. This is an air front. Of the Memphis Belle leave the soil of England for the 25th time. The friendly soil of England, with its ordered farms and rural hamlets, its country estates surrounded by formal gardens and well-kept parks. The England these Americans knew only from the classics they had to read in school. The England of the towns and cities, whose people have defended their island's freedom for over 1,000 years. But today, their countryside has changed. Today, their island has been converted into a gigantic bomber field, a super aircraft carrier anchored off the shores of Fortress Europe, with hangars and machine shops, with hundreds of dispersal points, perimeter tracks, and concrete runways. This is England in its 5th year of war. And this is the new battlefront. The air front, from which we seek out the enemy. Not his infantry or his artillery, not his panzer divisions, but the greater menace, the industrial heart of his nation, the foundation on which the Nazi Empire and its armies stand, the power behind the German lust for conquest. The steel mills and refineries, shipyards and submarine pens, factories and munitions plants, pinpoints on the map of Europe which mean rubber, guns, ball bearings, shells, engines, planes, tanks, targets. Targets to be destroyed. And these are the destroyers, each with a belly full of bombs, and 10 men like the crew of the Memphis Belle. Pilot Captain Robert Morgan, industrial engineer from Asheville, North Carolina. He's flown this ship across the Atlantic. The other pilot, Captain Jim Verinis, business administration student at the University of Connecticut. Radio operator and gunner, Sergeant Bob Hansen, construction worker from Spokane, Washington. Navigator, Captain Chuck Layton, chemistry student at Ohio Wesleyan. Engineer and top turret gunner, Sergeant Harold Locke, from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Used to be a stevedore. Besides keeping the Belle in order, he covers the sky above. Tail gunner, Sergeant John Quinlan of Yonkers, New York. Clerked for a carpet company, but he quit December 8th, 1941. Ball turret gunner, Sergeant Cecil Scott. Firstman for a rubber company in Rahway, New Jersey. Pilot to crew, 10,000, put on oxygen. They're climbing higher now, 300 feet a minute. The strain on the planes and on the men is mounting. The rest of the crew, Bombardier Captain Vincent Evans, operated a fleet of trucks in Fort Worth, Texas. Waist gunners, on the right, Sergeant Bill Winchell, chemist for a paint company in Chicago. And on the left, Sergeant Tony Nastal, used to repair washing machines in Detroit when he was a kid. Now he's 19 and has 2 Nazi fighters, confirmed. It takes all of a pilot's strength to keep a 30-ton fortress in tight formation. But the formation is the bomber's best defense against enemy fighters. The planes are deployed to uncover every gun, stepped up and down, echelon to the right and left, arranged to overcome the danger of gunners firing into friendly ships, arranged so concentrated cones of fire from the caliber 50 machine guns cover the sky for 1,000 yards in every direction. The friendly coast of England slips by below. It doesn't look like much now, but in a few hours when you come back, if you come back, this will be the most beautiful view in the world. Higher and higher, climbing to reach your best operational altitude, 25,000 feet, 5 miles straight up. So high you can't be seen from the ground with the naked eye. So high that after 1 minute without oxygen, you lose consciousness. After 20 minutes, you're dead. From now to the target, you go about your routine duties, plot your course, check your equipment, and wait, and think. Higher and colder. Temperature, 40 degrees, below zero. Take off your glove and you lose some fingers. You look out at the strange world beyond. Reflections in plexiglass, like nothing you ever saw before, outside of a dream. Higher and higher into the lifeless stratosphere, until the exhaust of the engines mixing with the cold, thin air condenses and streams the heavens with vapor trails. They're far from beautiful, for they point like beckoning fingers to the formation, signposts in the sky for the enemy to spot us. For these bombers to accomplish their mission, a plan is needed. Carefully worked out, timed to the minute. The job is to bomb Wilhelmshaven effectively and economically. The enemy is strong, skillful, determined to stop us. Here are his defenses. Airdromes, well dispersed. Each plane indicates a stopo or squadron of fighters. Heavy anti-aircraft, highly trained and accurate, all along the coast and defending his vital installations. Radar to warn him of our coming. Here is our plan to divide his defenses and weaken his opposition. At 13:30 hours, shortly after takeoff, 6 groups of planes will be heading toward the enemy coast from 6 directions. The Blue Force, 100 B-24 Liberator 4-engine bombers. The White Force, 300 B-17 Flying Fortresses. The Green Force, 300 B-17s with an escort of 6 squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts. A force of B-26 Marauders, twin-engine medium bombers with 6 squadrons of RAF Spitfires escorting. Almost 1,000 planes and over 8,000 men in the air. The enemy alerts all his aerodromes. But which is our main force? What are our targets? Where should the Nazi controllers send their fighters? It's our job to make them guess, and guess wrong. A half hour later, at 1400 hours, the Blue Force will be heading east across the North Sea with the White Force following. These enemy fighters are tied down, waiting to meet them, and will not be able to attack the Green Force. These fighters must come up to attack the Green Force, and thus will be no threat to the Blue and White Forces. The B-26s and Spitfires will bomb and strafe a key rail junction, diverting these 6 Stockholm and preventing the enemy from concentrating too many fighters on the Green Force, which is scheduled to bomb an aircraft factory at Hanover. At 14:30 hours, the Blue Force will threaten this entire coastal area of northwestern Germany. Which target will it be? Flensburg? The Kiel Canal? Or will it turn suddenly and bomb Hamburg, Vegasack, or Emden? Actually, it carries no bombs at all. It's a decoy and keeps the fighters from the northern area busy while the White Force, the main effort, heads for the submarine pens of Wilhelmshaven. At 1500 hours, while the White Force is over its target, only a fraction of the available German fighter strength of the area can intercept it. Because of the Blue Force diversion and the simultaneous bombing of Hanover by the Green Force. This is the plan of battle for today, drawn up by the Combined Operations Planning Committee and approved by the Commanding General. The White Force, lead group, low squadron. We've crossed the invisible line of enemy radar. The Hun is expecting us. Steel helmets go on. Watchful eyes strain. Tight formations are held tighter still. Tense gunners more alert because here it comes. The enemy coast. From up here, it looks the same as any other. Houses, roads, green fields, factories, waterways. But they are the houses and fields of those who invade and oppress. They are the factories and roads of the people who twice in one generation have flooded the world with suffering. Suffering in such quantity as the history of the human race has never known. Brought torment and anguish into countless American homes. Gold stars and telegrams from the War Department. The first flak, just harmless-looking, silent puffs of smoke. Only each puff is a shell exploding, throwing shrapnel around the sky. Exactly the range. Accurate flak by radio prediction. 5 miles down, Nazi anti-aircraft batteries calculated the altitude, speed, and course. Where will the next one hit? You try not to be there. The docks and submarine pens of Wilhelmshaven. Approach to the target starts. No smoke screen can protect it. Now the enemy knows the path of your approach and walls that path with a flak barrage. But you fly right through it. Flak so thick you can get out and walk on it. Morgan changes course every 15 seconds. Evasive action to confuse the flak batteries. Bomb sights set for correct altitude and speed. Bomb bay doors open. The bombing run begins. Pilot to Bombardier. Okay, Vin, you've got it. Now Evans flies the Memphis Belle, controlling it through the bomb sight. And now we are most vulnerable. Committed to our bombing run, we can't dodge flak or fighters. Here's the first. Top turret fires at it. Evans must ignore the battle. Crosshairs lined up on target. Adjustments for wind drift made. Two more fighters diving from 9 o'clock. Flak now has the range too. They've hit this fort, but he keeps on his bombing run. As lead bombardier, Evans's aim must be good. Every other ship in the group will drop its bombs when he drops his. Now one pointer on the bomb site moves toward another stationary pointer. The instant they touch, bombs will release. They touch. Bombs away. Half of the mission is over. The easy half. Now to get home. The flak stops. That means fighters out there somewhere. A staffel lurking behind that cloud. Or hiding up in the sun where the glare blinds you and you can't see them, waiting to dive down on you. Fighters at 6 o'clock. This is what a gunner sees. A speck in the sky. That's a fighter. And then a blink. That means he's firing at you. 2,300 rounds a minute. In a running battle, one of the most important instruments is the interphone.
There's 4 of them. 1 o'clock high.
They're coming around. Watch.
Guys, get out of that plane. Bail out.
There's one. He come out of the bomb bay.
Yeah, I see him.
There's a tail gunner coming out.
Watch out for fighters. Keep your eye on them, Bill.
See any parachutes, Quinlan?
2 parachutes open. Flag at 9 o'clock.
8 men still in that B-17.
Come on, the rest of you guys.
Get out of there.
Come on, bail.
So far, 3 more shoots. Flag, 11 o'clock.
Fighters, 6 o'clock.
ME-109 at 3 o'clock.
Keep after him, would you?
I see him. I'm on him. Come on, you son of a bitch. I got him.
Quinlan, confirm that fighter.
He got him, Chief. Look, he's bailing out.
Damn it, don't yell on that intercom. Fighters, 10 o'clock.
Watch those 2 and 12, Vin. They're coming in.
They're coming in, Scotty.
Get that ball turret on him.
Save the ammunition as much as possible.
Watch that fighter coming in the 3 o'clock.
He's coming in a half roll. Pull her up, Chief. Pull her up. Hurry. This fortress is hurt. Engine on fire, losing airspeed and altitude. Drifting into the flak, alone and helpless. A straggler. In a minute, Nazi fighters will swarm in like buzzards for the kill. You can watch, but you can't go down to help. You keep your formation.
Here, too, the mission is being flown. None the less real for being in the minds and hearts of these men behind. Ask anybody who's been to a field in England, or anywhere else our bombers are based, and he'll tell you that there's drama here, too. Waiting to see who's coming back. To watch them, you might not realize how tense these ground crews are. But they are tense, and plenty worried. In Air Force talk, this waiting is known as sweating out the mission. These men know the flight plan. Their watches told them when the bombers were running into enemy flak, when they were over the target, when they left the enemy coast. And now their watches tell them the bombers should be nearing the field. Every ear strains for the first sound of the engines. And then somebody hears them. And somebody sees the first faint specks in the distant sky. Every face turns to see and count. The watchers try to read the numbers on the ships. These planes have priority to land first. The colored flares mean wounded aboard. In the hospital window, these watching men know what that means. They know what it feels like to lie on a bouncing fortress floor for hundreds of miles through the frozen stratosphere in great pain, with the other men in your crew fighting to keep you alive until they hit the field. The field. Home. It'll be okay then. Because there'll be medical care. The best. As soon as the wheels of your plane stop rolling. Head wound. Concussion. 20-millimeter cannon shell exploded in his radio compartment. Shock. Internal injuries. He'll be all right, though. Flak burst scattered flying shrapnel. He's full of steel splinters. This pilot's leg is not a pretty sight. Neither are the docks at Wilhelmshaven. These men will all get the Purple Heart. And this man, too, posthumously. A transfusion right in the plane. This gunner's too weak to be moved. The new life-giving blood flowing into his veins might be the blood of a high school girl in Des Moines, a miner in Alabama, a movie star in Hollywood, or it might be your blood. Whoever it is, thanks. 36 planes left this field this morning. Now 6 more arrived. That makes 20 home. And this one's 21. More wounded aboard. .22. Coming in with his left inboard engine dead. .23, with a feathered prop on his left outboard engine. .24, Southern Comfort, with a chunk of tail gone. .25, they flew home on their luck. .26, not a scratch. Control tower learns that 2 more landed at a British field to the south. 1 a crash landing, crew safe. That makes 28. 29. A rough landing, but her pilot's badly hurt. It's a wonder he brought her back at all. 29 planes back, so far. 29 out of 36. Our losses were heavy, but the enemy's were far heavier. We destroyed a German aircraft factory, a rail junction, submarine pens, docks, and harbor installations. That's specific, known damage. But who can tell the number of German torpedoes that will not be fired, the number of our convoys that will get through now, the soldiers and seamen's lives that will be saved, or the battles that will be won instead of lost because of what these bombers and airmen did today. Pilot and tail gunner. They can laugh now. Fire on the inboard engine did this. Flames streaked back and burned the stabilizer, too. Another crew luck brought back. Here's old Bill. A pretty good airplane when it took off. Lost its nose. Lost its navigator. Bombardier wounded. Top turret gunner and pilot hit. Hydraulic system shot out. No brakes, no flaps. But old Bill came back. Now, among the returned crew members, talk flows like a river. Talking out every detail of the mission. These are the faces of combat. Faces of Americans who have watched their comrades die. Faces that can never forget the enemy. And they're in no mood to have their picture taken. In the control tower, Colonel Ray, the group CO, is still watching and waiting. And then he spots the last flight. 3 more planes. And one of them is the ship everyone has been pulling for.
The Memphis Belle. The last few miles of this trip have been a joyride. The strain is over. They can leave their guns now. Now they know they're going to go home. To Spokane, Green Bay, Asheville, Detroit, Chicago, Fort Worth, and Yonkers. The Belle comes in for her landing. But first Morgan buzzes the field, cuts the grass with the giant fortress. It's against the rules, but this is a special occasion. The wheels of the Memphis Belle come back to the soil of England for the 25th time. This is a day they will never forget. Another great day soon after, Brigadier General Hansel visited the field and presented the Distinguished Flying Cross to every member of the crew. Then there was another day. Their Majesties, the King and Queen of England. Johnny Quinlan never thought anything like this would happen to him when he left Yonkers. The ground crew were a little self-conscious about being dressed in fatigues, but the Queen thought they were very nice. Finally, two more visitors came. General Acre, commanding the 8th Air Force, and General Devers, U.S. commander of the European Theater. The Bell crew received them in flying clothes, as General Acre read the order for what he called their 26th and most important mission. Return to America to train new crews and to tell the people what we're doing here. To thank them for their help and support and tell them to keep it up so we can keep it up. So we can bomb the enemy again and again and again until he has had enough. And then we can all come home. The 8th Air Force, who are now flying deep into Germany, bringing destruction to targets almost 1,000 miles from their bases. Destruction like this. And who have never once been turned back by the enemy. To those men, this film is gratefully dedicated.
Islands are situated in the North Pacific Ocean, forming a chain which extends about 1,200 miles west-southwest from Alaska Peninsula towards Siberia to form the southern boundary of the Bering Sea. The Aleutians comprise 4 groups, the Fox, Andreanoff, Rat, and Near Islands, and constitute part of the territory of Alaska, USA. Of volcanic origin, there are numerous combs on the chain, many of them still active. The coasts are rocky and surf-worn, rising immediately from the water in steep, bold mountains. The Aleutians are the storm pot of the Western world. A permanent low-pressure area prevails there. Cold air masses from the polar regions flow with a shearing effect against the warm, moisture-laden air masses over the Japanese current to form cyclonic disturbances. Because of the Earth's rotation, these disturbances move from west to east, and this meteorological phenomenon constitutes one of the most dangerous weapons in the arsenal of our enemies, for it enables the Japanese to operate behind the moving curtain of a storm. In the early days of June 1942, they employed this advantage in an all-out attempt to secure absolute domination of the entire Pacific Ocean. Behind eastward moving storms, they dispatched 2 invasion fleets against 2 widely separated objectives, Midway Island and Dutch Harbor, an operation designed to break the American line of sea defense upon which the security of the Pacific coast depends. Both attempts failed. American air forces engaged the enemy task force at Midway, achieving an historic victory. And at Dutch Harbor, American land-based planes from secret American airfields swarmed down, seemingly out of nowhere, to knock out 1, 2 troop-filled transports, 3 heavy cruisers, 2 destroyers, and 1 aircraft carrier. In pursuit of the enemy, our Army and Navy airmen flew through storm and fog and hurricane, 1/5 on instruments, 4/5 on luck, 20 hours out of 24 sometimes, through blind passes, by uncharted peaks, down through zero ceilings, not knowing whether the enemy fleet or a mountain lay below, sweating it out for hour after blind hour of continuous flight, and home without benefit of directional beam to land on unlighted runways, refueled, and take off into gray, blind hell. There is no monument to the many who went out and did not return. They fought and patrolled, in many instances, until their fuel was gone, knowing they would be forced down at sea, but unwilling to break off contacts they had made with enemy forces. Few are alive of those that flew against the Japs in the Battle of Dutch Harbor. If you wish to see their monument, you Americans here at home, look around you. In retiring, the remnants of the defeated Japanese task force landed troops on the undefended islands of Attu, Agatu, and Kiska. We immediately undertook the offensive. So commenced our march out along the bridge toward Asia. In late August of 1942, a large detachment of our troops landed on an island several hundred miles out along the chain, and under 2 hours by bomber from Kiska. The name of this island is Adak, and it is closer to Japan than any other American outpost. Typical of the Aleutian chain, it is windswept, treeless, rain-soaked, carpeted with sphagnum, a flat, spongy vegetation like undersea growth, which oozes water at every step. The only bird life on the island is scavenger ravens, big, black, wind-ruffled. Remote as the moon and hardly more fertile, Adak is next to worthless in terms of human existence. Its sole value is that of a pin on a staff officer's map, but that value is measureless. Strategically, Adak is one of the most important locations in the world. 11 days after the occupation, an airfield was completed, and the first U.S. bomber sat down. 3 days later, flights took off on a bombing mission to Kiska, with complete fighter protection. Since that time, missions over Kiska have become a daily affair. The airfield is the heart of the island, beating with 500,000 horsepower of heavy and medium bombers, Navy amphibians, pursuit ships, transports. The sound of the engines warming up starts before dawn, echoing back from the mountains that flank the field. Every day, weather permitting, the bombers take off on at least one mission. Often on good days, a first flight takes off in the sunrise, others following at regular intervals, so that Kiska's under bombardment every hour until nightfall. Equal in importance to the airfield, and without which the airfield could not exist, is Adak's excellent harbor. Landlocked on 3 sides with a natural island breakwater, it enables heavy draft vessels to come inshore and unload by lighter under almost any weather conditions. If the airfield is the heart of Adak, the harbor is its hungry mouth. Its demands are ever on the increase. By day and by night, freighters, tankers, transports deposit munitions, supplies, men upon the beach. Standing guard over all the defense installations, coastal batteries, anti-aircraft emplacements, machine gun posts. There is nothing vulnerable about Adak any longer. skies are constantly circled by aerial patrols and never-ending relays. PT boats, those seagoing in fighters, stand by in readiness for a surprise landing attempt. Offshore, destroyers keep endless vigil, slipping like ghosts through the fogs, challenging each hull-down speck of an approaching vessel on the horizon, listening with their undersea ears for the beat of an engine, scanning the seas for the plume of a periscope, standing rugged duty on the Bering Patrol, or slipping into port on the flank of a convoy. Although the sea lanes to Adak are constantly traveled by convoys, and contact with enemy submarines is a daily occurrence, sinkings in these waters have been few and far between. Contact with an enemy submarine may continue on and off for hours, during which the undersea craft maneuvers for position to attack, venturing within the radius of the convoy's undersea detectors, only to crash dive, then kill engines and lie silent on the bottom as our destroyers bear down and release depth charges. Our destroyers and Navy reconnaissance have held the undersea enemy well in check. The flow of men, munitions, and supplies flows ceaselessly on. The gigantic task of furnishing every American expeditionary force with the materials needed in carrying the fight to the enemy falls to the Army Service Forces. ASF is the bloodstream of our whole military body, maintaining its every organ and muscle. Adak presents a special problem, as the barren island furnishes nothing toward human needs save drinking water. Everything else must be brought here. Food, fuel for men and motors, machinery, munitions, shelter material. Raise these basic requirements to the nth power. Add parts and replacements for everything from Caterpillar tractors to can openers, plus the operations of estimating, purchasing, assembling, transporting, delivering, and becomes apparent why the job of supplying a military force is now dignified by a $12 word like logistics. Since the original landing, the manpower of Adak has been constantly augmented. Where before it was hundreds, now it is thousands. Troops arrive after a voyage that may take anywhere from a week to a month, depending on the sea route. But it took more than a single month to land them here. The months of training that toughened them to rigors of wind and weather, that taught them to handle their weapons, that made them into soldiers. Add those months to the period of the voyage from the States. Down Eastern accents mixed with Texas drawls and Middle Western twangs and Brooklynese. Bookkeepers, grocery clerks, college men, and dirt farmers. That is, of course, ex-dirt farmers, ex-bookkeepers, ex-college men. Soldiers now, as though all their lives they'd been nothing but. For the day, special orders and news appear on the bulletin board. Since newspapers and magazines are usually from a month to 3 months out of date, these radioed news flashes are the only means by which the soldier knows what's going on outside. No fresh meat, no green vegetables, powdered eggs, tinned bully beef, potatoes, canned tomatoes, peanut butter, canned fruit, and coffee make up the basic diet. And biscuits, barrels full of biscuits. Appetites are huge. Officers and men attend the same mess. As often as not, an officer doesn't display the insignia of his rank. The salute is reserved for rare occasions, but discipline does not suffer. Customary military formality is relaxed, plain civil necessity taking its place. After months in an outpost like Adak, there's a tendency on the part of the soldier to think and live only in terms of the present. That faraway world from which he came begins to seem like a dream to him. A letter in his hand is proof of the reality of that world, of Saturday night dances, jalapenos and ice cream sodas, of sport pages and shaving in the same mirror with the old man. A letter means more than his paycheck to the soldier. If he happens to be in the Air Corps, he'd gladly make an extra flight over Kiska for one more letter. No moving pictures, no stage door canteens or USO, no girls, pretty or otherwise. Nothing to drink, not even a Coke. Candy bars, cigarettes, and chewing gum are rationed. But you never hear any belly aching. The extraordinary fact is that morale actually gets stronger the closer troops come to the enemy. On Adak proper, morale is first rate. The site of the airfield was originally a shallow tidal lagoon. Army engineers diked up its inlet and drained off its waters by means of a channel to the sea. It was their resourcefulness in exploiting a natural formation which made possible the completion of the field in 10 days and 11 nights, for the work never ceased. Bulldozers shifted thousands of tons of the lava ash which composed the bed of the lagoon. Not a new game to the Corps that built the Panama Canal. As the waters receded, grading crews followed, leveling and impacting the area in preparation for the final surface. This surface was not to be the usual concrete runway of an airport, but a steel one, whose sections had been prefabricated in American mills. It was put down by the infantry, of course, in 36 hours. A 1.5 million square feet of it. The severest weather kept our planes grounded. Local storms materialize, deluge the island, and pass on or dissipate, all within a few short minutes. It's a land of cloudbursts and rainbows. If you don't like the weather, wait a minute, the soldier says. Everything the weatherman has to offer may be had in a single day. Downpours, hurricane winds, hail, snow, fog, sleet, and sunshine. It is not so much bad weather as changing weather that makes flying hazardous to the uninitiated there. A new pilot must learn to side slip through local squalls and sit her down in a field rimmed by mountains and under a half foot of water. casualties, however, occur in the anti-aircraft fire over Kiska. As a rule, our bombers make it back, but often they are sorely crippled and with wounded or dead aboard.
In my father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself. And where I am, there ye may be also. And whither I go, ye know, and the way ye know.
The day's mission is the highlight of each 24 hours. Eyes turn skyward and ears strain for the faint beat of approaching engines. At the first sound, an alert is flashed to the ground defenses. Units clear for action. Anti-aircraft and machine guns are stripped, ammunition broken out, and everything is put in readiness for an enemy who may be tailing our flights home. 6 bombers went out, and 6 are coming back. Ship lands. The remainder circle the field, another coming to Earth each time around. Those damaged or with wounded aboard taking priority. It's a revelation how much punishment one of these big bombers can take and still navigate. Unless both sets of controls are shot away or an explosive shell finds the gas tank, the odds are all in her making it safely home. Anyone who's been over will tell you that the most wonderful ride in the world is the ride back from Kiska. No matter if 2 engines have conked out and daylight is pouring through the wings, there's just something about the scenery on the way home. Crews proceed to the field operations tent of the Bomber Command, where they will be questioned as to results and observations. Their jigsaw reports taken singly are compared and cross-checked until a complete and accurate record of the operation has been assembled. Thereafter, they're dismissed with nothing to do till tomorrow but eat, drink, and be merry.
I've got 6pence to blast me on my line. I've got 2pence to spend and 2pence to lend and 2pence to send home to my wife. No cares have I to grieve me, no pretty little girls to deceive me. I'm as happy as a king, believe me, as we go rolling home. Rolling home, rolling home, rolling home, rolling home, by the light of the silvery moon. Happy is the day when the airman gets to pay as we go rolling home.
But ADAC's tomorrow begins today with a directive from Kodiak Island. A photographic ship accompanies missions to Kiska. It's tasked to follow the bombers over their target, recording the immediate results of the bombardment, also enemy defense activities, new installations, camouflage. These photographs are studied by specialist interpreters and submitted with comments to the General and his staff officers, Colonel William Prince and Colonel C.M. McCorkle. Here is Kiska, her camp area, with its steel huts, her hangars, her underground railway, her gun installations. Kiska, one of the hottest spots on the Earth, or above.
The main objectives in any mission from ADAC are the destruction of enemy shipping en route to Kiska, destruction of installations on the island, harassing of enemy personnel.
When the broader aspects of the operation have been decided upon, the senior officers of the bomber and fighter units work out its details. Among considerations in planning a mission are the type of aircraft to be employed, the weight and type of bombs, the time, altitude, and direction of the attack. All of these are interrelated, a change of one influencing all the others. The overall determining factor is weather. For this reason, the Navy meteorologist plots his charts up to the very time of takeoff. A change of weather at the last moment may mean a complete revision of tomorrow's plans. Tomorrow is Sunday. At their outposts on the island, Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish chaplains, not priests, ministers, or rabbis, but chaplains, all, are leading fighting men in their devotions. Under the snows of an Aleutian mountain, these defenders of the faith exercise the first of their four freedoms. But so far as the business of war is concerned, Sunday on Adak is like any other day. There's a mission going out at 13 o'clock. Bombs must be brought down to the field from their camouflage dumps. A heavy bomber carries either 16 250-pounders, 12 500-pounders, or 8 1,000-pounders. The size of the bomb to be employed depends upon the nature of the target. Since if the target is small, there's a better chance of hitting it with a salvo of 250-pounders than with a single large bomb. On the other hand, in congested areas, such as the campsite at Kiska, a blockbuster comes into its own. Tail fins and fuses are put on directly before the assembled bomb is hoisted into the bomb bay. When the time comes, bombs can be released either individually, in sticks, or in salvos. Belts of ammunition are brought to machine guns and threaded into receivers ready for firing. The rounds are put onto the belts in successions of threes, red-tipped tracers, yellow incendiaries, and black regulations. Each moving part of each gun has been tended with watchmaker's care, and every belt of ammunition is cleaned, oiled, and checked before the takeoff. It is 12:40 o'clock, and the pilots who are going to fly the mission receive final instructions.
3 flights, 2 of B-24s and 1 of B-17s are to go over the target. The first flight at 1,100 feet to drop 500-pounders on anti-aircraft installations at North Head. Then to proceed along the coastline, strapping to the western limits of the camp area. The second flight at 7,500 feet to drop 1,000-pound bombs on the camp area. The third flight at 4,500 feet to destroy hangars with 500-pound bombs. Second and third flights to follow at intervals of 45 seconds. 3 fighters to precede each bomber flight at 600 feet, and 3 fighters to afford overhead protection from enemy aircraft.
Assemble around the ships, awaiting the appearance of their officers. A bomber crew is a team, and the longer it's together, the better the teamwork. Theirs is a mutual responsibility. The safety of the ship and the lives of all the others may depend on any single member. Trust, respect are implicit in such a relationship if it is to endure.
Maybe in the beginning you don't like the color of a guy's hair, but if he's all there at his job, you'll get to like it fine.
Enlisted men eat, sleep, fly together. Their voices on the intercom become familiar, easy to understand, and understanding is vital. Every gunner knows the quality of every other's marksmanship and courage. The navigator can plot a 1,000-mile course over open sea and make a landfall. 8 men can testify. Trust and respect for the bombardier, the radio operator, the engineer, co-pilot, and trust and respect for the ship they fly. A monument ought to be put up to that pre-war fraternity of high school speed maniacs, for out of their ranks, our fighter pilots are largely drawn. They bring to their hazardous undertakings split-second judgment, inspiration, daring. Lieutenant George I. Riddell, 12 strafing missions over Kiska. Lieutenant Hawley P. Mills, 14 missions. Lieutenant Lyle A. Bean, 13 missions. Major Milton Ashkins, 15 missions. Lieutenant Henry J. Strankowski, 11 missions. Colonel Jack Chenault, son of General Chenault of the Flying Tigers. Colonel Jack has a 0 and a submarine to his credit. A last-minute weather observation is made. The word is given to go. It's good luck and over the hill. The aerial camera goes aboard. The bomber pilot informs his crew the exact part their ship is to play in the mission. Your bomber pilot is of a different breed to your fighter. Where the fighter is reckless and inspired, the bomber pilot is responsible, determined. Because of the size and imponderability of his ship, there are no last-moment decisions for him. And besides the big, intricate, costly piece of machinery that a heavy bomber is, he has the lives of 6 or 8 others to think about. 100 men, 9 bombers, 12 fighters, are setting out to attack and immobilize 10,000 men behind naval and military defenses. This is the significance of aerial supremacy. But behind this supremacy lies the enormous system which makes it possible for the ships to take off. ASF, Naval Convoy, Army Air Transport, the Corps of Engineers, Army and Navy Intelligence, Signal Corps, Ordnance, and Ground Forces. These have done their part for today. The stage is set. Rehearsals are over. The actors are ready. The curtain is going up. But this is no make-believe drama. They will be playing for keeps. William O. Erickson, who sat the first bomber down on Adak and led the original mission over Kiska. of engines makes the earth tremble and the ravens rise. The echelon proceeds toward Kiska. It's about an hour and 3/4 from Adak to Kiska, one of the most hotly defended of enemy-held areas. Kiska is also one of the most strongly fortified. The Japs have dug in like so many moles. An estimated force of 10,000 goes underground at the sound of our approaching engines. We cannot, by air attack, hope to annihilate. We can only harass the force on Kiska, cripple the island's defenses, keep the enemy from adding to its resources, while we build our own fighting strength to the day and the hour when we shall undertake a landing operation. Radio contact is maintained between the bombers and Adak throughout the flight, which proceeds at military speed, 165 miles per hour. During the first part of the journey, the waist guns are swung into position, turret mechanisms tested, and trial rounds fired. Time moves slowly going out to the target. Crew members have even been known to play stud poker. The route is quite familiar by now. Many pilots and crews have made the flight 25, 30 times. Along about the time Amchitka is sighted, they begin to look out for enemy planes. The men whose regular job it is say no matter how often a fellow's gone over, he always feels funny up there over Kiska. At a signal from the squadron leader, the pilots will open throttle, and the planes will go into the bombing run. For a minute and a half to 2 minutes, they will proceed at level flight in an absolutely straight line toward the target, thereby enabling the bombardier to make his computations: wind velocity, speed, temperature, altitude, drift. There can be no deviation whatever in the flights if the bombs are to find the target.
10 miles and 3 minutes from the objective.
Before Kiska Volcano, the mission deploys, each flight going to its designated altitude in preparation for the run. The enemy will endeavor to throw the flights off their runs, and to this he will bring all his firepower to bear. The earth below will blaze with hatred. Our ships will heave and rock in the ack-ack. Machine gun bullets may make a filigree of their wings. High explosives may open up holes big enough for a man to crawl through. Little Kiska, outer defense of Kiska Harbor.
Bombay doors open. Bombay doors open. 6 degrees right on course.
The object is to hit the target, not to avoid anti-aircraft. Remember this, you're just as liable to run into it as away from it. The best way is to forget what's happening outside and make the run by instruments. That way, if it comes, well, you just look over your shoulder and see a man with a long beard, and you say, "Good morning, Father Abraham."
I want every man to stick by his gun until I say he can leave. Use every round of ammunition on this ship. Fire straight at the gun flashes until they stop. If we're hit and have to bail out, there'll be plenty of Navy around to pick us up. Okay, shall we give it to them?
Kiska. flight, low altitude. At 4,500 feet. Are destroyed, burning. Our bombs found the target. 9 bombers came out, and 9 are going home.
War correspondents and their photographers gave Americans a unique view of war, focusing not just on combat, but on the lives of ordinary people caught up in a great struggle. This film takes us from the beaches of Normandy to the very gates of Berlin, following the Allied advance as it raced to the east, liberating the people of France. Filmed and narrated by one of the correspondents, this film gives us a glimpse into the world of the World War II war correspondent. An interesting sidelight to the documentary are the many well-known people who appear on screen, including Ernie Pyle, George Stevens, Ernest Hemingway, and Edward G. Robinson.
The one place that intrigued me was my first trip to London and the House of Parliament in Big Ben. Now, these pictures, you must remember, are more than a quarter of a century old. Now, the thing that amused and entertained our boys who were stationed all over England was Westminster Abbey. And there were quite a few Americans who came there to see the sights and see Westminster Abbey. And these are the scenes that I wanted to photograph on one Sunday afternoon. Another area that intrigued me was Marble Arch. Marble Arch on one Sunday afternoon was full of people. You must remember that London was being bombed almost every night in this particular time. And I was photographing these speakers. Every speaker was speaking on a different subject, but the police stood around and watched. And as long as there were no arguments, any strong arguments, nobody was hurt. And the people in the audience were arguing back with the speakers. Most of the children who lived in England, or a great many, I should say, were sent out of the city. But a lot of them had to remain behind. But in spite of a war, they managed to find entertainment. I was rather surprised to see these children drinking out of community drinking cups that were changed to the fountain. And I'd like to make candid shots of these children so they didn't notice me, but every once in a while they did. But this youngster is taking a cool drink on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. And we discovered that the St. Paul's Cathedral had been hit several times, but not badly damaged. And of course, one of the other attractions was Buckingham Palace and the gates, which were protected by British troops, not in the bearskin hats which they wore in peacetime, but in full war uniform. And this is the way they paraded up and down. They weren't performing for the camera, but they were actually doing their duty. But you notice the barrage balloons in the background. London had barrage balloons all over the area. And it was said that if it wasn't for the barrage balloons, with all the equipment that was being brought into the country, that the islands would sink into the sea, but the barrage balloons, they said, was holding it up. You must remember, too, that food was pretty scarce in London at this time, and it was being brought in whatever way they could and being unloaded. It isn't often you get a bright day like this in the spring in London, and this was an opportunity to show what the soldiers were doing while they were waiting for the invasion. This is Fleet Street. Discovered this Irish policeman guarding the street, and we saw considerable damage in the area. But soon we were down on the south coast of England, where we met some of the other correspondents who were scheduled to cross the channel with us. And you'll probably recognize some of the old-timers who covered the war in that particular time. I was given a shovel to defend myself, and it proved to be a valuable instrument. And here we see Larry LeSueur of CBS. Larry LeSueur was covering the war for CBS, and so was Wertenbecker on the left, Ernie Pyle here. This is a close-up of Jack Thompson, and this is Larry O'Reilly of the Associated Press. And we're saying our farewells because we were expected to meet again in Paris. Here on the left, we see Clark Lee of INS and Bill Stoneman, who came from Chicago, from the Daily News, and several other of the correspondents were being boarded aboard a military truck to be taken to the South Coast. And we went through small British towns, and life was going on as usual. People were in the marketplace buying food, and as though nothing was going on. But after a 150-mile ride, that's how we felt, riding in an Army vehicle. We found Plymouth was pretty badly damaged. A lot of the buildings were completely destroyed. Soon we found these American Jeeps ready to be boarded aboard landing craft, and you notice the bars that are attached to their bumpers. And they're designed to cut wires that the Germans had a habit of putting across the road that would sometimes cut off the head of the drivers. We weren't allowed to wander around the area by ourselves. Each crossroad point was under guard of both an American and a British soldier. And if they wanted to see what you had in your bedroll, you had to show it to them. But this is the care that was taken that the secret of the invasion be kept as long as it could. These are the two men, Wes Carroll of the OWI and Pete Carroll and Wes Haynes, rather, who were with me, and we went aboard an LCI number 5. Pete Carroll here came from Boston, and he was a photographer for the Associated Press. And we tried to keep our mind off what was coming, and we knew it was going to be a short time before we would be on board. We had our first taste of K-rations, which didn't taste bad if you were hungry. And we also were able to see the beautiful countryside in that area. And these are the sort of shots I wanted to bring home to show my family and friends. Pete Carroll was using some of his film to make a few shots himself. And soon, we were down at the docks. And there we found units of the 101st Airborne Division carrying everything they could carry by hand, boarding landing craft that were so heavily laden they had to be pushed off the docks by trucks, as you see in this manner. And these men were being taken out to larger craft and boarded before the invasion. And here we see several units carrying grenades, bazookas. They didn't have an opportunity to load this aboard jeeps that were not fully available at this particular moment. We were aboard a fleet of LCIs, and here shown with the commander of the invasion group in the center, and the captain on the right, rather the captain of our ship, Lieutenant Patton, was in command of the LCI number 5, and we found out that he participated in several invasions in the Mediterranean area. And we felt rather confident that he knew what he was doing. But we stayed aboard this ship for almost 5 days. This is the commander of the squadron. Wes Haynes was trying to get ready for the trip into Paris. I think he was premature. And these are units of the 101st Airborne Division aboard our landing craft, amusing themselves. And I don't have to tell you who this man is imitating. And I was told later on that he was killed in the action. Of course, every ship had a mascot, and ours was no different, but the boys provided for their mascot's welfare with the making of a life preserver, just like the ones that they wore themselves. And then one afternoon, Lieutenant Patton briefed the crew and told them that we would be sailing that afternoon. And they let out a cheer because they wanted to get it done and go home. And here we see the LCI number 4 with the commander moving out into the channel. And this was a tremendous sight to see ships from one end of the horizon to the other. Ships of all kinds. They tell me there was well over 1,000 ships. But even so, we thought this was just another exercise. As we continued on, we felt that we'd be turned around, go back and try again another day. But when we continued on into the night, we knew it was the real thing. At one time, we had a bit of a scare. They said there was a submarine in the area, and one of the DE boats threw some bombs into the channel. And they exploded, but we never saw any attack at all. Here are some scenes actually taken close to the beach, where the ships made a right-angle turn and headed for the area where we were to land. That is a DE boat in the distance. And of course, we were on the alert for any kind of attack, even airplane attacks. Fortunately, our Air Force did their job well, and at no time did I know of a German attack, except after we had landed, 2 planes attempted to strafe the beach, and I happened to be in the area. Now, these are some scenes that I took with my camera that was reduced to 16 millimeter. This particular scene of these men going ashore was taken by an automatic camera aboard a British landing craft, and they were the first men to land. The reason it was taken by an automatic camera was because they wanted to have a record of what happened should the landing fail. At least they might have a record if they were able to recover the film of what happened and how to avoid it if they had to try another attack. But here are some scenes landing on the Utah beach, and this is the way we went ashore. This is, again, is at the British beach, but you notice the men didn't dash ashore after being aboard a landing craft for 5 solid days. They just walked slowly and cautiously, fearful of bombs and mines that were sown in the area. You notice they had their rifles wrapped in cellophane. But this is the way we had to go ashore. And I needn't tell you that a lot of the boys didn't make it. Here's one of the famous scenes taken from black and white film of 2 men being shot down right before your eyes. Here is Pete Carroll and Wes Haynes carrying our own equipment. The section of the beach we were on was being attacked by enemy fire, and in the previous shot you could see a bomb actually land not too far from where we were. There it is again. The bulldozers were trying to clear roads to let our jeeps and tanks move forward. And even though it was June, the area was quite cold, as it usually is in that part of Normandy. Of course, the men dug their foxholes a little deeper, and we had the good fortune of finding a concrete wall which helped serve as protection. But even now, we're taking some of our wounded back to the beach so they can be transferred back to England. But when the tide went out, the ships could not come in close, or those that went aground had to wait for high tide to be refloated if they weren't hit. We stayed on the beach the first night and lived in a foxhole. And soon we showed some of the first prisoners taken in the area late the first day who were captured close to the beach. This is our first command post, where General Collins on the left is talking to some of his officers. And we were able to get some of the first hot food at this place. And although it kept me very busy for 8 solid days, I used up all the film I had and decided to go back to England to get some more and probably to get a bath. I hadn't had my clothes off during that entire time. And my landing at England took place at a place near Bournemouth. It almost looks like the cliffs of Dover that everyone is familiar with. But it was a beautiful sight to see the coast of England, but didn't realize it at that time that the buzz bombs would start coming over, and here we see some of them flying over the English coastline. And these buzz bombs were a terror weapon. They didn't know where they would land, but the British were quick to set up machine guns and anti-aircraft fire to knock them out of the sky, and they managed to shoot down quite a few. They even sent planes up into the sky to knock them out of the air. And of course, sometimes they did get through, and where they fell, they caused considerable damage. But you must have missed that pretty good shooting. There's one actually coming down, and it landed in the London area, and wherever they landed, they caused considerable damage. My second crossing of the Channel was made on an LST, and this time with units of the 3rd Armor Division that was sorely needed because they were bringing over more tanks and vehicles to carry us in the direction of Cherbourg, because we needed a port badly. The LST was manned by a British crew. That's the captain in the British uniform. But we were in a long convoy of many of them, everyone loaded to the gills with equipment that was sorely needed. But here you'll get an idea of what the beach looked like. And these ships are actually waiting for the tide to recede so they could send their equipment ashore without going through deep water. On D-Day, they had to go through the deep water. And at this particular moment, they're waiting for the ramps to be rebuilt after a severe storm so they could go ashore. Now, you can see the problems they had on D-Day, because when the landing craft hit the sandbars, the men started wading ashore and found deeper water ahead, and those that had their life preservers too low around their waist turned turtle, and many were drowned. But these are units of the 3rd Army heading in, crossing the deep spot just ahead of them and headed toward Cherbourg itself. This was a remarkable sight, and the ships were lined up as far as the eye could see, bringing supplies ashore. We needed Cherbourg badly because we thought we could use it as a port, but we found that Cherbourg, shown here, was pretty badly destroyed by the Germans themselves. They destroyed the docks, which we thought we could use, and it took them, if I recall, almost 2 months before we could bring a ship in. They set up mines and destroyed the famous Cherbourg docks where the transatlantic liners used to land. They not only destroyed the docks, but also the inland bridges that crossed the rivers that entered the Cherbourg area, the canals. This is one of them was destroyed by the Germans. Soon the French people came back into the city and gave us a warm welcome. And soon we found the prisoners, and I think they took something like 16 or 18,000 men out of the Cherbourg area, and they're still holding their personal belongings, marching toward the beaches because they had to be transported to England and some eventually to the States to be held in prisoner of war camps. And even at this time, those that could talk to us or would talk to us said we'd be pushed back into the Channel in less than a week. Of course, at every headquarters area, we found that the Germans had a picture of Herr Hitler, and our boys are using it as a pinboard. Now, here is the first official ceremony held in France when General Collins on the right presented the tricolor flag made out of parachute cloth, seen here, to the mayor of Cherbourg. And our boys of the 7th Corps were given clean uniforms for the occasion. And soon the people that came back to Cherbourg after the fighting stopped came to visit with us and talk to us. Here we see Ernie Pyle in the center again. And this is Bert Brandt, who we saw earlier shooting for AP. But the troops began to move in the opposite direction to attack the enemy on the St. Lo line. And we were passing through the city of Boulogne, and of course it was completely destroyed. I was there several times since the war, and it's been rebuilt beautifully. But the Germans tried to make a stand here, and wherever they did try to make a stand, we had to knock them out, and in so doing, destroyed the city. A little later on, I had an opportunity to see the construction that was built by slave labor, and all along the beach, especially in the Normandy area as well as other areas, they built these triangles. Many of them had mines attached to them so that if a boat touched them, they would explode. This is a church in Barfleur. That was a pretty little town that the Germans evacuated because the commander liked the city so much, the little town so much, that he did want to see it destroyed, and just actually withdrew rather than let it be destroyed. It was a little fishing village, and I had the good fortune of coming back several times because the hotel was still intact and serving very excellent French food. A little further down the coast, we found these fortifications built by slave labor, and even these metal fences just to keep us from landing in the area. And these heavy fortifications that were many feet thick, these correspondents were looking it over. In some areas, the Germans saw to it that they were destroyed, blowing them up so that we couldn't use them against them if they tried to take them back. They even destroyed their own weapons. But we noticed that the walls and fortifications were very thick and very strong. The area was taken over by the Navy, and there was an observation post right on the end. This is near a town called Granville, and there is the lighthouse at the point that sort of separated Normandy from Brittany. And that's the observation post the Germans used, and it's under the command of our naval officers to use as an observation post. Soon we brought in some of our big armament, and they were set up in a field and firing at German positions. But even though the guns were firing, the French people were bringing in the crops as though nothing was happening. This surprised me, and I couldn't help but wanting to make a picture of it. One of the first things that the Americans did was to build an airstrip in the St. Mary Glees area, not far from the coast. And they used a strip that was supported by metal wire to keep the planes from sinking into the ground. And they were using it also as a place to take off from with 500-pound bombs under each wing. But the strip was so rough that frequently the bombs would break loose, and even though they were armed, they had to be disarmed and taken off the runway. These are P-47s that they were using here, and there's one carrying a bomb under each wing to attack the enemy deep in behind the lines. You notice these two planes taking off at once, raising considerable dust, but managing to get off a very short runway. Here you notice a plane, you notice the buckle under the wheels. This sometimes caused the mesh wire to break and come up and hit the plane's propeller, causing it to crash before it left the ground. And here's an unfortunate accident, two of our planes. One of the highlights of our trip across France was Mont Saint-Michel. Mont Saint-Michel was on a river that separated Normandy from Brittany. And here we met some of the other correspondents. This is Bob Capper of Time magazine, and I know there's a member in the audience who knew Bob Capper. And Bob Capper was eventually killed. He was covering the war in Indochina when the French was fighting. But at Mont Saint-Michel, we found the Poulard Hotel, run by Madame Poulard. She served some delicious omelets for which she was famous. And that's Madame Poulard and her famous hotel in the background. And a lot of the correspondents gathered here to fight the war from this point because we were closer to the front line, if you could call it such, than we were at our main bases. And there we see the river that separates Normandy from Brittany. This is a beautiful little island, and the building at the top is a monastery that was still intact. It was not destroyed at all. And here are some of our GIs looking over the sights being shown around by a woman guide. Soon we met some of the other correspondents we knew, and here we see Charles Collingwood, the gentleman on the right, with Helen Kirkpatrick of the Chicago Daily News, and Joe Liebling of New Yorker magazine, the bald-headed chap, and Wertenbecker on the extreme left. This is Charles Collingwood and Helen Kirkpatrick of the Chicago Daily News. This is Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway was covering for Collier's magazine, and we met him at Mont Saint-Michel. Here he is seen talking with Bill Walton, who incidentally became a fast friend of President Kennedy. And these were just moments that we could take a little time out to rest. There's Helen Kirkpatrick. And the man in the center in this picture is Bill Stringer. And he was killed trying to get into Paris. One of the things that correspondents tried to do was to get into Paris before anyone else. And he was hit by an 88 shell. But this is just a moment of relaxation. We had a few, and of course, these are the shots I wanted to bring home to the family and friends. But the little island was very quaint, and it was a very old place, but it was fortified in several ways. We discovered that the beaches in the area, especially when the tide was out, would be high and dry, and they put those sticks in the sand to keep our planes from landing. We found a little family of 3 brothers, and even the tall blonde one is a boy, I found out later, because their grandmother is taking care of them. Their parents, I was told, were killed at the Battle of St. Lo. One afternoon, rather late, I walked out behind the island because as the sun was setting, I could get some interesting shots of the island from the seaside because they have an extremely high tide here and would leave the island high and dry, but the tide would come in real fast and there was always danger of quicksand, so I didn't stand in one place too long. But the receding waters left this unusual design in the sand. We didn't stay at Mont Saint-Michel very long, but continued on deeper into France. In fact, I went into Brittany for a while and discovered that the boys had found a lake there, which we'll see in a moment. But the countryside was beautiful. It was during the summer, and the crops were still in the field. But our boys, after washing out of a helmet for many weeks, decided to use this beautiful lake for a bath. They were permitted to do so because they were fighting the enemy at an area called St. Malo. And incidentally, you probably recall the Germans held out at St. Malo for many months, almost to the end of the war. And, of course, it's the American sense of humor that helped them win the war, too. But here are some of the correspondence that we sometimes traveled together, and we found a little river that proved to be useful as a bath. There are a lot of these small rivers around France, and at every moment that we could spare the correspondence, this is a group of them. That's Ralph Morse in the front, Huey Broderick, and Joe Priestley, and of course here we see Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson was one of the many actors and actresses that came to Normandy to entertain our troops. And they held a show right in this Normandy barn that was not too far from the fighting. Soon we found ourselves in Rambouillet. We see Ernie Pyle again on the left, and George Stevens, the Hollywood director, myself, and, of course, Pete Carroll. It was shortly after these pictures were taken that Ernie Pyle decided to return back to the States and then went to the Pacific, where he was killed. George Stevens was a very well-known Hollywood director, I'm sure you recall, and he died only a few years ago. But practically every correspondent turned out to try to get into the city of Paris. But we found, as I said earlier, that the General Eisenhower had given permission to the 2nd French Armored Division to take the city of Paris because the important thing was to destroy the enemy. And they didn't consider Paris as a target. It would delay them if they did try to take the city themselves. They wanted to circumvent the city because they wanted to give the honor to the French. General Leclerc was in command of the 2nd Armored Division, and he refused to let the correspondents accompany his force to get into the city, simply because he didn't want any shots made until he had the city secure. We were glad to see Paris because it was a city of great beauty. And these are some of the shots taken on the first day of liberation. And soon General de Gaulle came into the city and paraded down the Champs-Élysées. And here he is taking the salute and receiving some flowers from a French girl. It must be remembered that de Gaulle was not well known at this time, and very few people could listen to the radio reports that told about his work in England prior to crossing the Channel. But soon he became very popular. It seemed as though everybody in Paris turned out to see de Gaulle. And he was marching down the Champs-Élysées at this point, and it was a tremendous sight to see. Later in the day, our own troops paraded down the avenue, and This was something that made us all proud. And suddenly, firing opened up from forces that were left behind trying to panic the people. But if you stuck your head out a window, you were bound to lose it. And this went on continuously for several hours. In fact, I was in the middle of this thing. These are shots that I took of people lying flat on the ground. They'd get under our car. We couldn't move the car while they were trying to get the people to stop shooting by raising white flags. But it went on continuously, and they did catch some of these people who were responsible for the shooting. At least they told us that. And unfortunately, they beat them to death right on the spot. It was a rather ugly sight to see, but somehow it was the war of nerves. Some of the buildings still contained Germans that were at headquarter points, and they were sworn at by the French. These are some shots made late in the day of the American troops marching through the streets of the city on the way to the front lines. Wherever we stopped, the French were there to trade champagne for cigarettes and to talk to us and find out what was going on. We were able to see the city. It wasn't badly destroyed. There was some small arms fire. The lion lost his tail, but generally speaking, all the bridges were intact over the city, and this is the Opera House. And since it was my first trip to Paris, I enjoyed seeing the beautiful city of Paris. Soon the people of Paris were out parading again along the Champs-Élysées with their newfound liberty. We discovered that the Eiffel Tower, which was reported destroyed and used for arms, was still intact. And soon I managed to get permission to go up into the Eiffel Tower and see what it looked like from up above. But there was much to be done, and even though Paris looked beautiful, conditions were very poor. The railroads were practically destroyed. There was no way of bringing in food. In fact, when we were coming down the road, we saw large trucks waiting to get into the city, loaded with all kinds of foodstuffs to support the city, which was in dire need not only of food, but of coal, because at this time it was getting pretty cold. It was late in the year, and there was no way of getting supplies in. These are scenes from the Eiffel Tower showing the Seine, and we see some troops parading through the streets. But we had to move on, and soon I had to leave Paris and found myself in the countryside beyond Paris and went into Belgium, where I managed to get into Brussels. These are some scenes of the Auteuil racetrack, which we found was opened shortly after the liberation. This surprised everyone, but they made them close the track after a few days of meeting. But one of the things that did surprise everyone is how well dressed the French women were, and they had a way of using whatever they had to make themselves look really attractive. And I understand this annoyed some of the other Allied countries very much, to think that they could get by like that. They even opened up the art galleries along the streets, and we didn't know whether they were permitted to do this prior to our getting there, but they certainly opened up for business very shortly after we arrived. We found a painter at work in the old quarter of Paris, and shortly after leaving Paris, I was in an area called the Ardennes. And the reason I took some of these shots of the countryside, because the weather was turning cold and the trees were turning their fall colors. And this is the town of Houffalize, which was completely destroyed on the breakthrough that occurred and the attack on Bastogne. I was in Bastogne just a few days before the breakthrough and was fortunate enough to get out of there, not knowing about the attack. That's General Collins again, talking to General Morris Rose, who was in command of the 3rd Armor Division. This is General Rose on the left. General Rose was killed in Cologne. These are units of the 3rd Armor Division that were fighting the enemy, and we managed to get some shots of them as they were being entertained by German children. We had a tremendous reception all the way across France, but when we got to Germany, the reception was not there. All the homes in the German area had white flags in front of them as an indication, of course, of surrender. And the children here were actually on their way to school. They're holding their ears because our guns are firing not far away, and they were just trying to avoid the noise. We found the Siegfried Line, as it was called, or the Dragon's Teeth, which were built again by slave labor, I'm told, and they were not a fortification against our tanks because our bulldozers took dirt and pushed it over the top of them and rode right over the top. But we found these fortifications stretched out from one end of Germany to the other, because somehow they felt that we'd perhaps get to Germany, and they were trying to keep us out, but they didn't succeed, of course. The war was moving rather rapidly at some points in Germany, and soon I found myself in the town of Aachen. Aachen was under fire when these pictures were taken. That's the reason the scenes are devoid of people. There were mortar shells passing over our heads all the time, and the enemy was holding the center of the city as we were making these shots, and we were just wondering how long the battle would take, and we discovered that the troops were just down behind that mold or that wreckage in the distance, and soon we discovered that these reserves were just a block or two behind the front line, and they were waiting to be called in. These are scenes of Berlin showing the tremendous damage that occurred in the city. The bombings were intense, and very little of Berlin was left standing. It shows that wars don't seem to prove very much except to destroy property and kill people. And we sometimes think that maybe one day we'll learn how to avoid wars, and perhaps we've made wars so deadly that we'll have to avoid them in the long run to stay alive. I was invited to fly home. Soon I was able to photograph some of the events when General Eisenhower came back to the States and was greeted in Kansas City. Then I was able to visit the collection of some of the weapons the Germans used just after the invasion. This is the V-2 rocket that followed the V-1s. The V-1s, and I heard many of them come overhead, were like a motorcycle engine. And whenever the motor stopped, it would cause the bomb to drop. The Germans had jet planes in the air before the war ended. And here is one that they actually used, and it showed a record of many American planes. And if you notice, 42 Russians were shot down by this plane before it was captured by our side. And in this exhibit, we see one of the Japanese kamikaze bombs that was on exhibition, and one of our pilots is trying it for size. And they didn't like the idea that you only had a one-way ticket, because they were intended to destroy the target they were after and the pilot with it. This plane, I was told, was built by the enemy to bomb New York, and it could fly the ocean and back, and they appropriately named it Alles Kaputt. Here we see some shots of what I call what the next war might look like, and this is the explosion of the atomic bomb in New Mexico. And I always like to feel when I show these pictures that perhaps it'll remind people that we ought to remember what World War II was like, and that World War III would be much worse. But I like to say that, repeat what one scientist aptly put it when he said the atomic bomb is here to stay. The question is, are we?